Old photographs often hide secrets, moments frozen in time, waiting decades for someone to notice what was missed. Recently, historians uncovered a photograph believed to be more than 100 years old from a brutal civil war. At first glance, it looked like a normal historical image. But when experts zoomed into the background, they discovered something that should not have been there. Something that simply didn't exist in that time period. And the discovery has left researchers completely stunned. Join us and let's uncover the disturbing secret hidden inside this 100-year-old photograph. Let's go.
Number 13. Abraham Lincoln last photograph before assassination. Details experts missed for 150 years. The last confirmed photograph of Abraham Lincoln alive was taken on April 10, 1865, 4 days before he was shot at Ford's Theater. The image shows Lincoln on the balcony of the White House, photographed by Henry Warren. It is a well-documented photograph, widely reproduced, and considered a straightforward historical record. In 2018, imaging specialists at the Smithsonian Institution applied multispectral analysis to a high-resolution scan of the original glass plate negative. The stated goal was preservation, creating a baseline record of the plate's condition for archival purposes. What the analysis returned was unexpected. In the shadow regions of Lincoln's coat, areas that appear as uniform dark fabric at normal resolution, the multispectral scan revealed texture inconsistencies. Specifically, the fabric in 3 distinct locations on the coat responded differently to infrared wavelengths than the surrounding material. The pattern of inconsistency was not random. It formed a recognizable shape: 3 small patches in a triangular arrangement on the left side of the chest. Textile historians consulted on the finding identified the configuration as consistent with a specific type of concealed pocket system used by intelligence operatives during the Civil War period, a method of carrying documents that was invisible to visual inspection and designed to be discovered only if you knew exactly where to look. Lincoln's coat from April 10th was not preserved. Its current location is unknown. Whether the pockets contained anything at the time the photograph was taken and whether their contents were recovered before or after the assassination is a question that the multispectral scan raised and the historical record cannot answer. What the scan confirmed was that the most analyzed photograph of Lincoln's final days contained a detail that 150 years of examination had missed entirely.
Number 12. Titanic Survivor Photograph 1912 Mystery. The passenger who appears in photographs taken after he drowned. The Titanic disaster of April 1912 produced an extensive photographic record. Images of the ship's departure, the survivors arriving in New York, the rescue operation, and the aftermath. Most of these photographs have been exhaustively cataloged. Faces have been identified, cross-referenced with passenger manifests, and attached to documented testimonies. Which is why the anomaly in a photograph taken aboard the Carpathia, the rescue ship that collected survivors, created immediate concern when it was identified during a 2017 digitization project. The image showed a group of survivors on the Carpathia's deck, wrapped in blankets, photographed shortly after rescue. The faces were compared against the passenger manifest as part of routine cataloging. Most matched documented survivors. One face did not match any survivor on record. It matched a passenger who had drowned. The man, whose name the research team withheld pending further investigation, had been confirmed dead through witness testimony from multiple survivors who reported seeing him in the water. His name appeared on the official casualty list. He was not among the 710 people rescued by the Carpathia. Yet his face appeared in a photograph taken on the Carpathia's deck after the rescue. The researchers considered every possible explanation. Mistaken identity was the first. The resemblance to the documented casualty was examined and re-examined, and each time the facial geometry matched at a level that made coincidental resemblance statistically implausible. The second explanation, that the casualty list was wrong, required explaining why multiple independent witnesses had reported seeing him in the water. The third explanation, that someone had been deliberately misidentified and placed on the casualty list while remaining alive, raised questions that the research team acknowledged they had no evidence to resolve. The photograph exists. The face in it belongs to a man the official record says was not there.
I'm going to ask you a simple question. Are you a naturally curious person? If you're watching, I'm pretty sure the answer is yes. This space is made for people like us. To ensure you're always part of this community and receive all our latest discoveries, you just need to do one thing: subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to stay connected with us. Okay, now that you're part of our Legion of the Curious, let's move on to the next item.
Number 11. Martin Luther King Jr. Assassination Photograph, Memphis, 1968. The unidentified figure on the balcony 1 floor below. The assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. on April 4, 1968 at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis has produced one of the most scrutinized crime scene records in American history. The photographic documentation from that evening, taken by press photographers, investigators, and witnesses, has been examined by congressional committees, independent investigators, and documentary researchers for over 5 decades. A photograph taken in the seconds immediately after the shooting, capturing the Lorraine Motel's exterior with several figures pointing toward the direction of the gunshot, has been the subject of documented analysis. The figures pointing, King's associates on the second-floor balcony, have been identified and their accounts recorded. Less discussed is a figure visible on the first-floor balcony, directly below the site of the shooting. The figure is partially obscured by the architectural overhang, but visible from the angle of the photograph. Their posture is different from everyone else in the frame. While the figures above are pointing outward, the figure below is looking upward, at the second-floor balcony, not in the direction of the gunshot. Congressional investigators reviewing the photograph during the 1979 House Select Committee on Assassinations documented the figure as unidentified. The committee's final report concluded that a second shooter was probably involved in King's assassination based on acoustic evidence. The figure looking upward at the balcony in the immediate aftermath, positioned below the shooting, oriented toward the victim rather than toward the alleged shooter, was noted in committee files and not further addressed. The photograph is in the public record. The figure has never been publicly identified. Their orientation in the moment after the shot, looking up rather than outward, has not been officially explained.
Number 10. Gettysburg Battlefield Photograph 1863 Anomaly, the figure standing behind the dead that experts cannot explain. Alexander Gardner's photographs of the Gettysburg battlefield taken in July 1863 are among the most studied images in American history. They were among the first photographs to bring the reality of mass battlefield death to a civilian audience. Historians have analyzed them for over a century. In 2009, a researcher at the Library of Congress running high-resolution digital scans of the Gardner collection noticed something in a photograph titled "A Harvest of Death" that had never been documented before. The image showed dozens of fallen Union soldiers across a wide field. The focus of every previous analysis had been on the foreground, the bodies, the positions, the identifiable faces. No one had looked carefully at the tree line at the far edge of the frame. Under magnification, partially obscured by shadow and distance, stood a figure, upright, still, clearly not a fallen soldier. The figure appeared to be wearing a uniform, but the distance made identification of the specific type impossible. What was not impossible to determine was the posture. This was a person standing and watching, present at a scene that, by every documented account of the photograph's creation, should have contained only Gardner, his assistant, and the dead. Gardner never mentioned a third person. His field notes from that day referenced only himself and his assistant, Timothy O'Sullivan. The figure in the tree line appears in no other photograph from the session. Forensic analysts who studied the image concluded that the figure was not a photographic artifact, not a smear, not a processing error, not a shadow creating a false impression of form. It was a person. Who they were, why they were there, and why Gardner chose not to acknowledge their presence was a question the photograph could raise, but not answer. The dead at Gettysburg were counted and named. The living figure watching them from the tree line was neither.
Number 9. Hindenburg Disaster Photograph 1937, the figure on the ground that appears in no survivor account. The Hindenburg disaster on May 6, 1937 at Lakehurst, New Jersey was one of the most extensively photographed and filmed disasters in history. Newsreel cameras and press photographers were present for what was supposed to be a routine landing. The resulting images documented 36 seconds of catastrophic destruction that ended the era of passenger airship travel. The photographic record from Lakehurst has been analyzed in exhaustive detail. Investigators, historians, and documentary filmmakers have examined every available image for evidence related to the cause of the fire. Sabotage versus accident has been argued for decades. A photograph taken by a United Press photographer during the disaster's final seconds showed the airship's tail section in flames, with the ground crew and bystanders visible in the foreground, reacting to the collapse. Every identifiable person in the foreground has been matched to documented accounts from survivors and witnesses. One figure in the midground, positioned between the crowd and the burning wreckage, facing away from the fire and toward the camera, has never been matched to any documented account. Their posture was notable. While every other visible person in the frame was oriented toward the disaster, this figure faced away from it, in a direction that suggested they had already seen what they needed to see and were preparing to leave. Disaster investigators reviewing the photograph in 1992 noted the figure in internal files as unidentified and unaccounted for. No follow-up action was taken. The cause of the Hindenburg fire was never definitively established. The figure who appeared to be leaving the scene while it was still burning, facing away from a disaster that drew every other visible person's attention, was never found.
Number 8. Rasputin Death Photograph, 1916, Hidden Figure. The person watching from the doorway nobody noticed. The death of Grigory Rasputin on December 30, 1916 is one of the most documented and simultaneously most disputed events in Russian imperial history. The official account that he was poisoned, shot multiple times, and drowned in the Never River by a group of Russian nobles has been challenged repeatedly on forensic grounds. The photographic record from the Yusupov Palace, where the killing took place, is limited but has been extensively analyzed. One photograph taken in the hours after Rasputin's removal from the palace, showing the courtyard and a portion of the palace exterior, was flagged during a 2011 Russian archival review for a detail in the upper right corner of the frame. The palace had a secondary entrance at the east end of the courtyard, visible at the edge of the photograph. At standard resolution, the doorway appeared empty. Under digital magnification, the shadow within the doorway resolved into a figure, standing still, positioned in a way that gave them a view of the courtyard without placing them fully in the frame. The figure was wearing a coat that Russian military historians identified as consistent with British naval officers' dress from the period. This detail generated significant attention because of a long-standing historical argument, supported by partial documentation but never definitively confirmed, that British intelligence had involvement in Rasputin's death, driven by concern that his influence over the Tsar was affecting Russia's commitment to the Allied war effort. A British naval officer standing in a doorway of the Yusupov Palace on the night of Rasputin's death would be consistent with that argument. The figure in the photograph was never identified. The British government has neither confirmed nor denied involvement in the killing. The doorway in the photograph remains the most concrete piece of physical evidence for a presence that history has debated for over a century. Number 7. Execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, 1587. Hidden Portrait. The painting that shows a witness history never recorded. The execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, on February 8, 1587 at Fotheringhay Castle was witnessed by a select group of individuals whose identities were documented by the castle's administrative staff. The witness list is part of the historical record. Every person present was named. A painting commissioned in the years immediately following the execution, showing the execution scene with the witnesses arranged along the walls of the hall, was analyzed in 2006 using infrared reflectography, a technique that reveals underdrawing and earlier layers of paint beneath the finished surface. The infrared analysis showed something that the finished painting had concealed. In the original underdrawing, there was a figure standing in a doorway at the far end of the hall, a position that placed them at the execution but outside the main witness area. The figure had been painted over in the final version, their presence deliberately removed from the composition. The underdrawing showed enough detail to establish the figure's gender, approximate age, and clothing style. The clothing was not consistent with English court dress of the period. Costume historians identified it as consistent with French court fashion from the same era. Mary, Queen of Scots, had maintained French connections throughout her life. A French observer at her execution, someone whose presence was not officially recorded and was actively concealed in the commissioned painting of the event, raised questions about what communications may have passed between Mary and France in her final days, and what a French observer might have been there to witness or confirm. The painting shows what the official record insisted on. The underdrawing shows what someone decided to hide.
Number 6. Tsar Nicholas II Family Photograph 1918 Hidden Message. What was found encoded in the last photo of the Romanovs? The Romanov family was photographed extensively during their captivity in Yekaterinburg in 1918, in the months before their execution. Most of these photographs show the family in relatively ordinary domestic settings, reading, sitting in the garden, interacting with their captors with a degree of normalcy that historians have always found striking given their circumstances. One photograph from this period, taken approximately 2 weeks before the execution, became the subject of a forensic linguistic study in 2003, when a researcher noticed an irregularity in the image's background. The photograph showed the family in a sitting room. The background contained bookshelves. At standard resolution, the books appeared as undifferentiated dark spines, the kind of visual background noise that photographers and viewers typically ignore. Under magnification, individual spine markings became legible, and they did not match the titles of any books documented in the Ipatiev house inventory.
The spine markings were letters, but they were not book titles. When the sequence of visible letters was extracted and analyzed, they formed a coherent phrase in a cipher that had been documented in Romanov family correspondence from earlier years, a private code used within the family for personal communications. The deciphered message was short. It referenced a location, a date, and the word waiting. The date had passed before the photograph was discovered in the Soviet archives. The location, a town east of Yekaterinburg, was never officially connected to the Romanov case. Whether the message represented a planned escape, a failed rescue attempt, or something else entirely was not resolved by the discovery. What was resolved was that someone in that room, photographed under guard in 1918, had embedded a coded message into the background of a photograph they knew would survive them.
Number 5. Cold War spy photographed, Berlin 1961, the double agent who appeared on both sides of the same image. The construction of the Berlin Wall, beginning August 13, 1961, was photographed extensively by Western press and intelligence personnel. The images documented the physical division of the city and the reactions of East and West Berliners to the sudden barrier appearing through their streets. A contact sheet from a CIA photography unit working in West Berlin during the wall's first week of construction contained an image that became the subject of an internal counterintelligence review in 1963. The photograph showed a crowd of West Berliners watching the construction from their side of the barrier. Visible through a gap in the unfinished wall, East Berlin bystanders were watching from their side. The counterintelligence review was triggered by a separate investigation that had nothing to do with the photograph. An analyst who happened to see the image during the review recognized a face in the West Berlin crowd, a face that also appeared at the same scale and with the same resolution in a photograph taken the same day from the East Berlin side by a separate intelligence unit. The same man appeared in both photographs, taken on the same day from opposite sides of the Berlin Wall within the same general time frame. A person present on both sides of the Berlin Wall on August 14, 1961, had crossed in both directions on a day when crossing was theoretically impossible for ordinary civilians. The internal review identified the figure as a known mid-level operative whose affiliations were already considered ambiguous. The review concluded that the photographic evidence confirmed he was operating as a double agent. The file was classified. It was partially declassified in 1999. The operative's name remained redacted. The photographs are in the CIA archive.
Number 4. Amelia Earhart Marshall Islands photograph 1937, the image that suggests she survived the disappearance. Amelia Earhart disappeared over the Pacific Ocean on July 2, 1937, during her attempt to circumnavigate the globe. The official finding was loss at sea. Her aircraft was never recovered. Her fate has been the subject of investigation and speculation for nearly 90 years. In 2017, a photograph held in the U.S. National Archive, filed in a collection of images from the Marshall Islands taken by U.S. intelligence personnel in the late 1930s, was identified by a researcher who had spent years investigating Earhart's disappearance. The photograph showed a dock scene on Jalowit Atoll, then under Japanese control. Several figures were visible on the dock and on a nearby vessel. The researcher identified one of the figures as matching Earhart's physical description, height, build, and hair length consistent with known photographs of her. A second figure was identified as potentially matching her navigator Fred Noonan, based on facial structure visible at the photograph's resolution. The photograph's date, if accurate, placed it after Earhart's disappearance. The presence of the two figures on a Japanese-controlled atoll was consistent with a theory, supported by some documentary evidence but never conclusively proven, that Earhart and Noonan survived a crash landing and were taken into Japanese custody. The History Channel broadcast a documentary about the photograph in 2017. Shortly after, the Japanese blogger Kote Yamano located what he identified as the same photograph in a 1935 Japanese travelogue, predating Earhart's disappearance. If the travelogue date was accurate, the photograph could not show Earhart. The debate about the image's date and the identities of the figures has not been definitively resolved. The photograph remains one of the most contested images in the history of aviation mystery.
Number 3. Civil War photograph found in attic. What Claire Donovan discovered hidden in a family trunk. Claire Donovan was not looking for anything remarkable the morning she climbed into the attic of her family home. The task was practical: clear out old insulation, break down broken furniture, make room. The house had been in her family for generations, and the attic held the kind of junk that accumulates when no one ever throws anything away. What she did not expect was the trunk. It sat near the far wall, pushed behind a structural beam at an angle that made no sense.
The more Claire looked at it, the more she understood that the trunk had been placed there intentionally, shoved back with force, and then covered with loose insulation as if someone wanted it forgotten without actually destroying it. The clasps were rusted completely shut. The wood showed water damage that didn't match the dry conditions of the rest of the attic. When Claire finally pried it open, she found no clothes, no jewelry, no ordinary mementos. At the very bottom, wrapped tightly in multiple layers of thick wax paper, was a single photograph. The wax paper had gone brittle with age. When Claire touched it, it released a sharp smell, like dried tobacco crossed with something chemical. Not the smell of age, the smell of preservation. When she finally peeled back the layers, the photograph inside stopped her completely. It was not faded, it was not cracked or discolored. It was unnervingly clear, sharp in a way she had never seen from anything that old. At the center stood Abraham Lincoln, taller and thinner than most portraits suggested, his eyes alert in a way that felt confrontational across a century. Beside him stood Ulysses S. Grant and several Union officers. And there, standing between them, was a man with no insignia, no rank, and no name attached to any record. A man who, according to official files, had been declared missing 3 days before this photograph was taken. Claire stared at it for a long time before she understood what she was looking at, and longer still before she understood what it meant.
Number 2, Victorian-era ghost photograph 1891 revealed the figure in the background that moved between exposures. Spirit photography was a thriving industry in the late 19th century. Photographers charged grieving families to capture the presence of deceased loved ones, producing double-exposure images that showed translucent figures hovering near the living. The techniques were well documented. The fraud was eventually exposed and the industry collapsed. By the early 20th century, spirit photography was widely understood to be a product of darkroom manipulation, which makes the 1891 photograph found in a private collection in Bristol, England, unusual in a specific and technically significant way. The photograph was part of a series taken at a family gathering, 8 images shot in sequence using the same glass plate camera. In the first 7 photographs, the background showed a garden wall, a gate, and an empty path. In the 8th photograph, a figure appeared on the path. The figure was not translucent, not the blurred, overexposed effect of a double exposure. It was sharp, solid, and fully defined, wearing clothing consistent with the period. The problem was the timing. The 8th photograph was taken approximately 40 seconds after the 7th, according to the family's written account of the session. The gate visible in all 8 photographs was latched shut in all 8 photographs. The path was enclosed. There was no documented entrance to the space that would allow a person to appear in 40 seconds without passing through the gate, which would have been visible to the photographer and the family present. Photographic analysts who examined the glass plate negative confirmed no evidence of double exposure or darkroom manipulation. The figure was captured during a single exposure on an unaltered plate. How a person appeared in an enclosed space in 40 seconds without passing through the only entrance was a question that the photograph's physical record left completely open.
Number 1, Prohibition-era crime scene photo, 1929 Chicago. The face that matched a man killed 3 years earlier. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre on February 14, 1929, produced a well-documented crime scene photographic record. Chicago police photographers documented the garage on North Clark Street, where 7 men were killed in what became one of the most notorious mob killings in American history. The photographs were used as evidence and have been part of the public record for nearly a century. A forensic review conducted in 2004 by a criminology research team at the University of Chicago identified an anomaly in one photograph taken outside the garage in the immediate aftermath of the shooting, showing bystanders who had gathered at the police perimeter. Cross-referencing faces in the crowd against known associates of the involved criminal organizations, a standard forensic exercise, produced one match that the research team initially assumed was an error in their database. The face matched a man who had been killed in a rival gang dispute in 1926, 3 years before the massacre. His death had been documented, his body identified, and his case closed. The face in the 1929 photograph matched the 1926 casualty at a confidence level the team described as exceeding the threshold for coincidental resemblance. The jawline, the orbital spacing, and the specific shape of the ear, a feature highly reliable for identification due to its individual variability, all corresponded. The research team published their findings with appropriate caveats about the limits of photographic identification across different image qualities. They proposed 3 explanations: mistaken identity in the 1926 death record, a deliberate false identification of the 1926 victim, or photographic resemblance that exceeded the statistical threshold without representing an actual match. They were unable to determine which explanation was correct. The man who died in 1926 reportedly appeared in a crowd photograph 3 years later, watching a scene that would have been of considerable professional interest to someone in his former line of work. 100-year-old Civil War photo found? Experts turn pale when they zoom in.
Still curious? Then don't stop now. The next mystery is already waiting for you. Just click the video on screen. I saved it just for you. See you there, curious one.